Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in today's workshop. Today's workshop is HR and Volunteer Management, part of the Small Black-Led and Racialized Organizations online workshop series. My name is Adil Marab, and please note this session is being recorded and will be available on the project webpage early next week. The presentation today and the additional tools and resources are available for download on the project webpage, the link will be posted in a bit in the chat box too. Next slide, please. First, we would like to mention a few housekeeping, engagement, and self-care points for this session. OCASI is committed to supporting full participation and engagement by all attendees at our events, including people with disabilities. This session is facilitated in English, French simultaneous interpretation, American Sign Language, and LSQ, Quebec Sign Language, and English captioning are available. If you wish to use the French simultaneous interpretation, please click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen, then click on French. If you wish to use the ASL or the LSQ, also you can click on the interpretation feature at the bottom of your screen, and under Watch, you can click on either ASL for American Sign Language or FSL for French Sign Language, aka LSQ. Second slide, please. Closed captions. If you'd like to enable the closed caption feature, also at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click on the icon CC for closed captions. We also encourage all our participants to share your thoughts and questions on Slido. You can either go directly to the Slido website and insert the code on the screen, or you can click on the link, which I believe will be posted in a moment in the chat box. Or if you prefer, you can also scan the QR code with your phone. We're going to give a few moments in case anyone would like to scan the QR code. And to also mention in the meantime that if you have any question regarding any of those steps that were just mentioned, please let us know in the chat and we will post those steps there too. Next slide, please. Okay, self-care. Zoom fatigue is real, so do what you need to do to take care of you first. Stay present and be attentive to your body and your emotions. Also, please fill out the evaluation form that will be shared at the end of the session to help us improve our future workshops. At the end of the session, when the meeting ends, automatically your browser will open to the surveys, one in English, one in French. Please take time. It's a very short survey, and it would really help us in making sure that our future workshops improve. Next slide, please. Land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the peoples of Turtle Island. The secret land on which we are gathered today has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. We acknowledge the land OCASI is situated on, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Palm Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, now I would like to introduce our trainer for today's workshop, Ingrid Wilson, founder and principal at GridFern Strategic HR. Ingrid is a global human resources executive and CHRO and equity and inclusion strategist with over 30 years of experience in corporate human resource strategy, board, and business strategy. Ingrid is a recipient of the Top 25 DEI Person of the Year Award 2021, the Canadian Multicultural Group, and LinkedIn directory of 1,000 plus women who inspire through their work, July 2022, and also Top 100 HR Professionals, National Diverse Awards 2023. She serves on the non-for-profit community and advisory boards and committees, including as the board of director, Humber River Health, board member at AIDS Committee of Toronto, community member, Region of Peel, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism Committee, DEAR. Board Director, Governance and Audit at the Canadian Association of Black Insurance Professionals, Founding Advisory Committee member, System 3 Inc., and Advisory Governance and Human Resources Committee, Black Opportunity Fund, BOF, and has previously served as a board chair and vice chair on other non-for-profits boards. Ingrid, whenever you'd like to start.
Okay, thank you for that great introduction. I was hoping you weren't going to read the whole thing, Adele, but thank you. So today we're here to talk about inclusive recruitment practices for all. So not just for employees, but volunteers, anybody that's in your agency space. So today we want to give practical examples of how you can go through an inclusive recruitment practice. And I just want to say inclusive recruitment starts from sourcing to the front door to the entire life cycle or career cycle of your employees or volunteers. So we've broken it down into certain sections, which we're going to look at on the next slide, please, that we will follow through. So the first thing we want to do is address moving beyond diversity, equity, inclusion, inclusive recruitment practices, common areas of prejudice and discrimination within organizations, because we all have them, right? Promoting a positive, equitable, and safe work environment. So safety is key for all of us. What volunteer management looks like, and then we'll give more examples of tools and tips as well. And much of what we're talking about today is related to the prepackaged tools that you are provided. So really important that you go back and look at those and use those. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about starting with moving beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll remind you to put your questions in Slido because I'm very interactive and it will be helpful for the follow-up session if you put your answers in and hopefully we can respond to all of those. Next slide, please. So diversity is about humanity. We are all humans, we're all diverse, and we're all sharing space on this planet. So we're sharing our identities, our genders, our differences and experiences all along our cultures, groups, and community, and how those intersect. So what I mean by intersecting is I am a Black woman of Canadian descent. So I carry different cultures and intersectionalities in my history and in my culture. I also want to stress that diversity is already here. You know, if I could see you all on the screen, we would know that we have a lot of diverse communities, ages, identities with us today and across the world. What we don't have is equity and inclusion. And what equity is basically removing systemic barriers that are embedded in a lot of our people processes and systems that prevent everybody from having the same access to opportunity and advancement. Inclusion means that every process, every program you put in place already has these structures removed. So we're not looking behind, we're not thinking about how it's going to impact one group or culture because we've already taken care of that. And equality, which I don't have on the screen, but I really need to speak to equality happens only when all these three things have happened, right? So if we had equality, we wouldn't have to worry about diversity, equity, inclusion, because equality means everybody has the human right and access to all that they need. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace is a little different than what we see in the everyday work life, because in the everyday personal life, because in your everyday personal life, you may walk away. You may choose not to shop in a grocery store because how you've been treated based on your identity. At work, as an employer or volunteer, you are going there to develop your career as a volunteer, to give back to community as a volunteer, or to work and get paid. So you may not be able to walk away in such environments. So it's really important that you're in a workspace that recognizes our differences and respects all our diverse differences. So respect the value that we all bring, and we treat each other the way we expect to be treated. So how you want to be treated and respected, because we all carry biases. So we have to remember that when we're dealing with each other. Thank you. Next slide. So this is an example of what you're looking for when you go into a workspace. And when I say workspace, because our workspaces have blended with our personal life, so you're bringing more of your personal life to the office. So that's why I prefer to call it a workspace. So when you're in that workspace, you're looking for an organization that talks about being committed to an equitable and inclusive approach. If you are leading that organization, this is the message that you want to make sure is understood and experienced by everybody walking into your space. That you see diversity, equity, inclusion as connected to your mission and critical to ensuring the well-being, health, and safety of every staff member, volunteer, or client, and the community that you serve as well. So that's really important, because that is the mission and purpose that you want to envision, so that your space is inclusive and equitable for all. Thank you. Next slide. So here's an acronym that I found with diversity, which I love, and the reference to the group is there below. So D is for different, I is for individuals, V is for valuing, E is for each other, regardless, S for skin, intellect, talent, or years. So regardless of your skin, color, whatever it is, we are all valued for diversity. So I love this little example. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about inclusive recruitment practices and what that looks like. So some tools that will help you through the process and understanding what can create those systemic barriers that you want to avoid. Next slide, please. So equitable and inclusive hiring is a moral and human imperative. So a lot of times you hear people talk about is a business imperative. When we are in the business of community, often we don't talk about business or corporate. We talk about our mission and purpose. And often, even in corporate, we're all dealing with people. So we need to make sure that we understand this is a human right. It is a strategic initiative as well that also strengthens the organization purpose, right? And brings forward the experiences and skills to your non-for-profit that you want at the organization. People will recognize these values that you represent as an organization, so they will be drawn to you when you're starting to look for recruiting people. And I should say, when you're talking about recruiting, it's not just employees, you're recruiting volunteers as well. So it has to be an intentional and planned process. So changing your hiring processes to make sure your team is more diverse and representative of the community that the organization serves. And to do that, you need to make sure that you are removing systemic barriers for all. So for example, how this webinar has been set up to be as accessible as possible for all people to enjoy, review and communicate through this process. Next slide, please. So inclusive recruitment practices, remove barriers, develop inclusive role descriptions, really, really important. So the words that you use and how you represent your role descriptions for employees or volunteers can automatically exclude people and prevent them from applying for these roles. Lead with your values. So talk about the purpose of the organization. A lot of times what I see in HR is that a job posting goes out and it doesn't talk about the purpose or the value. It's just a job posting. So there's no connection to the organization, the community served. So this is your time as an agency to build your brand. Talk about what you do. Always look at building your brand and purpose. So that should be in your role description right at the top as well. Examine your processes for bias. So again, where are you recruiting? Where are you looking for volunteers? Is it accessible? Are you setting up panel interviews? Have you told the individuals who are applying that it's going to be a panel interview? Because some of us get very intense when it's a panel interview, especially if we're not prepared, right? And it may just be a normal part of how we handle different types of interviews in neurodiverse worlds, right? So it's really important that you prepare individuals for their volunteer and employee interviews. I always tell people in HR, interviews are not a test, right? If you're testing somebody, you tell somebody you're testing them. But if you're bringing them for an interview, you want to set them up in the best light possible to be successful in your interview. So nobody's wasting each other's time, and it's a more inclusive process. And again, it will expand your network because it gives you an opportunity to bring people to the organization that you may not have a role or a volunteer role for them at that point, but you may have in the future, or they can connect you with other groups that are instrumental for the organization's purpose. Thank you. Next slide. So we're going to talk about common areas of prejudice and discrimination within organizations. Next slide, please. So here is an example of the top 8 workplace discriminations that we see. And I hope none of them are surprising, because I know this session isn't as interactive because I can't see you all. But if anybody has experienced any of these workspace discriminations, please respond in Slido so we know that we can address it better in the next session and do follow up to that as well. So race discrimination. I'm only using the word race here because, you know, it's a webinar. We're talking about the discriminations and how they're codified in the world. Race is a social construct. Race has been created to put each of us in boxes because of what we look like or how we identify. So unfortunately, there's this common thread put through that you belong to a race. So that's the first thing that people deal with when they see you walking down the street. You must belong to a race because you're a Black woman. Not understanding my background, which is Syrian, Danish, and Jamaican, right? You can't tell that from looking at me walking through a space. Disability discrimination also leads to accessibility discrimination and also leads to neurodiversity. Not understanding how individuals need to be set up and given opportunities so they can thrive in the workspace versus taking something away from them. So starting from a zero-sum base that you've already set individuals, whether staff or volunteers, up not to succeed. Pregnancy discrimination. I'm going to tell you a story. When I used to recruit for senior leaders, they used to tell me sometimes in certain industries, you don't want to hire somebody in this age group or this person because they're probably going to get married soon, and that means they're going to have babies soon, and that means they won't do the work because they won't be here. So that happens, right? It still happens today. And we need to be careful that we don't make those type of assumptions as agency leaders and as people who are representing HR. We cannot do that. Gender discrimination, age discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, religious discrimination, and parental status are some of the ones that we see all the time. And age discrimination takes precedence in a lot of spaces. When people get to a certain age, there's an assumption that they can't do certain work. Parental status, we're not taking into account that we have different parental status across the world, across the entire world. It is not expected that everybody has the same parental status. And one that I want to talk about that is not here is motherhood discrimination, right? So again, similar to what I talked about the pregnancy, but also caregiver discrimination as well, because there's a belief that women can't do a certain job because they have to take care of either children or parents. Okay? So let me know if you need more information about these common areas in the Slido. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the culture of language. So understanding culture is more than just understanding that we speak different languages, right? It's how we engage, how we do not look at people directly in eye to eye, because in certain cultures, you are taught not to look each person in the eye, especially if you represent as a man or a woman. In certain cultures, you also don't talk about I. You share as we. So if you're working through projects and you're asking individuals if they're able to do a project based on previous experience and skill sets, you're going to ask them to give you examples. So sometimes people will say, we worked on a project, even though they were leading the project, because in some cultures, talk about the we, right? It's a shared success versus I led the project. So you have to take that into account. You have to ask more questions. Body language, facial expression. Again, if people aren't looking you in the eye, your tone of voice, you know, if you're getting frustrated or exasperated in an interview because the person is asking you to repeat your questions or give more examples, don't assume it's because they're not listening to you. It could be other reasons, that they need more time to absorb and respond, and you responding with the or exasperation gives a very demeaning impression to the person. So language and culture are intertwined. It's how we behave, it's how we act. And just remember that if you are managing a recruiting process as well, that how your behaviors are coming across are impacting the individuals, and they're making a decision as to whether they want to work or volunteer in the organization. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about gender bias. And this first piece here talks about the words that we use in job descriptions, right? A lot of times research has shown that some of the adjectives that are used come across very strongly as non-neutral. They designate to men or women. So you hear competitive, competent, outspoken more with men. And words like sensitive, collaborative, and compassionate are often associated with women. And with women, you'll hear the term bossy versus outspoken or collaborative, right? So you have to be careful the words you use. If your environment is fast-paced, then reflect that in your job description, but don't put fast-paced just because you want somebody in the role. If the space is not fast-paced, then you're going to exclude certain people from that role who may be able to do the job quite well. Another sentence that I see quite often: must be able to speak to clients. If you instead said must be able to communicate with clients, then what you're doing is taking away systemic barriers, because people communicate differently. They may need accessibility tools or otherwise that you can include to help people communicate in that role. So that statement alone is very exclusive. Gender diversity in your candidate pool. So research again is showing that women tend to apply for roles when they meet 100% of requirements versus men who will say 60% of the qualifications will allow me to succeed at this role. Also, other cultures and groups are the same. They want to be sure about how they will thrive in that culture. I saw a question pop up. Uzi, can you add that to Slido as well so that I can follow up after? If we don't get a chance to speak about that at the end of this. But yes, that's a good observation. So the different cultures impact how we communicate, right? So it's really, really important to understand how we communicate. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of wording that we use in job descriptions that can be exclusive. So here's some gender neutral alternatives. So instead of saying strong, right? Capable, proven, exceptional. Because when you put in a job description that this person must have strong experience, strong skills, sometimes people won't apply, right? Because that word is not a word that is used a lot in their culture to describe how they work, right? Lead, analysis, individuals, decisions, and driven are other examples of words that can be challenging. So I'm going to point to individuals, right? A lot of times you hear people saying, okay, guys, let's go down the road. Okay, guys, let's work on this project. Okay, guys is not exclusive. We all use it way too much, right? Another option for instead of saying guys, okay, crew, okay, team, right? So you're moving away from putting people into these buckets. And driven in particular, you know, some people may be driven with purpose, purposeful leaders, versus being driven and aggressive in a role. See how driven communicates very differently in those purposes. But if you just put driven in the job description, the norm is people are going to see aggressive, and that's, you don't want to get that. You want, especially in our type of work in community, purpose driven, you want somebody who is passionate, motivated to move your purpose forward. Okay, next slide. Adele, please tell me if I'm speaking too fast as well.
Not at all. Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. So here's some more descriptors. So competitive, expert, objective, and principles. So when you're writing your job descriptions and you go out, I know a lot of people will go out and look on LinkedIn or other places to find job descriptions. Try and look at like community-based job descriptions first if you're a community agency, because the ones that tend to come up on LinkedIn, unless they're coming from Charity Village or other places, tend to be very corporate speak. So they're going to use the words like competitive and expert. I'm going to tell you, none of us are experts. My philosophy is that we are always learning, right? We're always learning, and that's how it becomes an inclusive space around us. So be careful the words you use. And for homework, go and look at some of the job descriptions you may have written in the past and see how often you use these words. Okay, next slide, please. So the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, okay? So a lot of times you'll see in job descriptions is you must have a degree, but you must have a degree from certain schools is the expectation, right? So sometimes in your life, if you've gone for a job interview, right, you will see that people are expecting an MBA or a certain level of degree that is probably not required for the role. So the question is, why are we asking for educational levels that may not be attainable in certain cultures, groups, or peoples, right? Because of our social economic determinants, where many have to work several jobs because of their family status, you know, their family structure. So they're working maybe 2 or 3 part-time jobs and don't have time to go to high-end schools because they're doing continuing education or other things, right? So you're excluding a whole group of people if you just use those standards in your job descriptions. Gender and racial bias unintentionally plays a role in postings as well. That's because female representation, especially if you're looking for people in higher level roles, if you're trying to hire somebody as a specialist or a manager, right, in certain fields and in certain levels, if you're asking for past experience, a lot of times you'll see these gaps, whereas because women came to the workforce later in Canada, later in lots of places across the world. So for example, in nursing, Black women weren't allowed to go to nursing school in Canada until the 1940s. That was not so long ago, right? So you have to understand the impact when you're saying that you want certain seniority or experience requirements for women of color and different genders as well, right? So let's go to the next slide. So in employment, these areas are crucial. So pay equity. And Tanya, if you touch each of those areas, it's going to give you some stats. Right. So in pay equity, women make 89 cents on average for every dollar made by men on an hourly basis. So every time we pull the stats, if you go to Statistics Canada, that's what's showing, right? This is where these statistics are coming from. And if you pull down in the data, it also shows a difference in the communities or cultures as well. And can you press the next one? So in equity and recruiting. So this we did, we pulled from interviews, right? So we do what we used to call looking for hiring people, but not showing the leaders or managers the names of the person on the resumes, right? Which is a challenge as well. So job seekers with Asian or African sounding names are 40 to 50% less likely to be called for interviews than people with Anglo sounding names, right? So for example, I can give you in the insurance industry, right? If you are looking for certain positions that are mathematical, there was a tendency to ask us to find people from the Asian groups because they're better at math. Well, who said that? That's not true, right? So lots of people have these skills and we need to be careful how we work through it. The challenge is when we take people's names off of when you're doing panel interviews and you take people's names off when you're shortlisting, when the person walks into the space and the panel or the interviewer doesn't know that people are from different culture, that can create a very uncomfortable situation for the employer volunteer and for the individuals that's recruiting. So be careful with that. And then the last one is the hiring and the equities. So this is coming from statistics from, again, Statistics Canada, region of Peel, and several of the other regions. Studies show that a white candidate with a criminal record has the same chance of getting a job as a Black candidate with no criminal record, right? So you can see the levels in inequity, right, through these processes. Next slide, please. So we want to interrupt biases during recruiting and hiring, and we all carry biases. We all make assumptions, right, about people that are not in our culture not the same identities or genders. We make assumptions that men are better at fixing things and with tools. That's not true, right? Women are better caregivers. That's not true. So we need to move those biases out when we're hiring. Make sure that we're assembling a truly diverse pool of candidates. And please do not gather a diverse pool of candidates just because. If you have an intention of you and you're posting a job and you already want to know that you want to hire somebody else, don't waste people's time and put together a diverse pool of candidates, right? That you're not going to hire. It gives the wrong impression. And when I mean diverse pool of candidates here, this is from the geographical communities that you are serving. So make sure that representation within your organization also represents the diverse communities around you, right? Decide in advance what factors are important in the job. So the critical pieces, not every other piece that you see in a job description. Make sure you highlight the critical pieces that you need for the skill set for the person to do. Accelerate talent attraction and retention programs by tapping into your diverse network. So making sure that you're using the communities around you and their diverse groups, including when you're doing panel interviews, bringing people in, leaders, knowledge keepers, elders from the community, asking them to participate in interviews helps to build that better connection, especially when you're doing volunteer recruiting, and you can always do it with employment recruiting. Make sure you're ranking candidates on the specific criteria that you chose. And this one, a lot of people don't like when I put this out there, but limit referral hiring programs. I worked with an executive director and CEO a few years back, and he decided that he wanted to suspend the referral hiring programs for a while, because what he was challenged with as a white man was that the referrals were bringing in too many people that looked like him versus people in the community, because he had a tendency through the years to hire people that looked like him. That was his comfort. So if you're continuing referrals from within the organization, you're going to continue hiring people that look like you without looking at the diverse communities, accessibility, age, and everything else around you. So look at your demographics when you're hiring, look at your community. This goes for volunteers as well. And at certain points, understand that referral hiring can be creating a problem as well. Okay? So we want to promote a positive, equitable, and safe work environment. Don't assume that everybody coming into your space feels that the space is positive, equitable, and safe. So next slide, please. So we want to talk about the front door, which is onboarding, right? That is the first place that people are going to make decisions about the organization that they've been hired into or they're volunteered into. And people make decisions in the first 30 days to the first 90 days. If it's very bad in the first 30 days, they're going to leave as soon as possible, right? So onboarding is key, and it has to be positive and it has to be intentional. Next slide, please. So what is onboarding? So onboarding is not just when the people come into the space for the first day, the first week, or the first 90 days. It is an entire year, and it can continue as individuals move through different roles. So if they get promoted into another role, if you give them another volunteer role, orientation and onboarding starts over. You have to onboard them in that role, right? So orientation is the short process where you bring them in, you sit them in a room, sign these forms, move on. Onboarding is a longer planned process that's going to follow them through to make sure they're successful for that first year and every time they move into different roles. So it helps somebody understand their role expectations, employer volunteer, and how their role helps the organization and aligns and supports the organization. It starts with recruitment. So when you're recruiting and you know you need to hire an employee or bring in a bunch of volunteers for the fall season, make sure that you leave space for onboarding, so you're not just throwing people out in the floor onto the community because there's no time for onboarding, because you have a program you're trying to roll out. So you need to be intentional to build that onboarding space in. And it requires a partnership between the hiring manager and human resources. So don't assume if you have people doing HR or one person doing HR, don't leave that on them. You as a hiring manager, the ED, the CEO, are the face of the organization. And if the person is reporting to you, you have to be there for onboarding. So again, orientation, HR can do. Sign paperwork, get people to sign up their volunteer agreements. HR or admin can do that. Onboarding is you as a hiring manager. Next slide, please. So again, why is it important? Helps with building a strong sense of belonging and engagement from the beginning. Am I being treated well in the first month? I'm looking around, nobody's talking to me, nobody's engaged. I don't know what my role is. I may need to find somewhere else to go. So that's why onboarding is important. Help new employees and volunteers fully contribute more quickly. You know, if you have new programs that they're rolling out that you've brought the volunteers in for, you need to make sure their onboarding prepares them for the role, improves overall role satisfactions, builds a more cohesive team of employees and volunteers, and helps increase new employee and volunteer retention. So again, the first 30 days, right? Next slide, please. So what is the leader's role in onboarding? Best practices and survey data demonstrates leaders play a critical role. Again, do not hand this to HR or admin. You need to be there, right? Or sometimes you hand it to a lead volunteer who's had more experience in the space. Again, if you're the person that the volunteer or employees reporting to, you need to be part of onboarding. So as a leader, your role is to facilitate the process from start to finish. So prepare and plan for the first 90 days. And Adele would have shared with you, we did an onboarding plan that you can use to give you some examples. Ensure the new employer volunteer is familiar with company policies, process, and those unwritten guidelines. We know we all have them in organizations, right? So for example, what's the real start time? It may not be written down, but what time do you expect volunteers to show up? And is the protocol that volunteers show up 20 minutes earlier than a volunteer shift? Ensure they feel welcome, engaged, and included. Don't just put them to sit in the back of the room and figure things out themselves. That's not engagement. Next slide, please. So inclusive onboarding is a pivotal moment for making employees and volunteers feel included. Pivotal moment, right? Is this the organization that I want to volunteer and work for? Next slide, please. So here's some tips. Letting the new hires and volunteers know inclusion matters in the organization. So that statement that we had before, we are a diverse and inclusive organization. This is how it links to our purpose. To always have that somewhere, right? The right timing is critical. Do not bring the person in if you know you've taken a 1-week vacation or even a 2-day vacation. You need to be there when your new hire or new volunteer starts. It is the worst thing when you show up and the person that you're supposed to be working with is not there. So, and a lot of times people will say, you know, I'm going to hire you or bring you in as a volunteer role, but I won't be there for 2 weeks and somebody else will help you with your role. That's not right, okay? Because you started the person off on the wrong footing. You're going to come back in 2 weeks and maybe you don't like something about what the person was shown, you're going to start the process over. And it's disrespectful. Wait the 2 weeks for when you come back to bring the person in. Be open to feedback, as long as it's constructive. Give programs, give them the space. Don't just say, read this in 3 hours and you need to know how to do this. Give them the space to learn, to absorb, because everybody absorbs differently, right? Remember, we all don't have visible abilities that we show. So for example, I have migraine. So if you put me on a screen that has all sorts of flashy bells and whistles, I'm going to have a migraine and I'm going to have to take medication for 3 days to try and work, right? So you got to give people the space to learn and absorb. So in those kind of situations, I would take longer to absorb something because I'm dealing with an invisible ability. My migraine takes over, right? Celebrate the small wins. So when they do something well, don't ignore it and assume, oh, it's just part of the role. Most of all, let them know that they're valued, always valued. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to talk about volunteer management as well. Next slide, please. So here's some best practices in volunteer management. A lot of this also applies to employees, so remember this as well. Valuing the role of volunteers. Often people will start with us as volunteers and then become employees. So treat them well and retain these people because these are the people who are building your brand. Volunteers are in the front line, speaking to the purpose of the organization. Defining rules and expectations, developing volunteer management skills, right? Developing clear roles, orienting and training volunteers. They need to be oriented just like employees. Provide supervision and leadership, create an environment where they're welcome and making volunteers feel like they belong, and recognizing their contributions. Remember, they're your brand. So for example, when you go into the hospitals and you are greeted by, if you're in the cancer ward or anywhere, they're all wearing the volunteer bibs, right? They're volunteers. Some of these people have been patients in the hospital who are volunteering and giving back their time, but how they interact and treat you leaves a lasting impression on the people that are coming in. They're carrying your brand and your purpose as an agency with them. So always remember that when you're hiring a volunteer and an employee, be intentional about who's representing you as well. Next slide, please. So values for volunteer involvement. So guiding principles, they're vital human resources. They're people too. Volunteers involvement fosters civic responsibility, participation, and interaction. It's showing your connection to the community, and it strengthens that connection with the communities and the communities that you're serving. It promotes change and development by identifying and responding to community needs, because often volunteers bring in feedback from the community as well, so you can understand how your organization can be purposeful and positively impacting the community. It's mutually beneficial, both for the volunteer and the organization. Just for what I said, you're getting that feedback, increases the capacity of organizations to accomplish their goals. We don't all have the funds to hire employees. Sometimes we're one person standing. So volunteers, that's how you can get the work done. So always remember that volunteers are available to help you. Also, one thing that volunteers forget, volunteer work is experience. Put it on the resumes, right? And that will help you with recruiting as well, because you want to recruit individuals who want to strive to possibly be employees in the future, but also want to strive to build up their own resume and their purpose for a community as well. So volunteer experience is definitely experience. And volunteer involvement is based on relationships as well. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about some tools and tips. Next slide. So here's bias that we see all the time. So biases are behaviors that we need to overcome. You know, we talk about unconscious bias all the time, but unconscious bias becomes explicit bias if we knowingly do the same thing all the time. Oh, look at your hair. You have this big curly hair. Let me touch your hair. If I tell you not to touch my hair and you keep talking about my hair and you keep touching my hair, That is intentional, explicit bias, and I'm going to take offense, right? So be aware that your biases exist. We all have them. And in my community, all Black women do not have the same hair, right? We all carry different cultures within us. So I've had experiences, for example, where somebody that is Black, represents as Black, a Black woman, is assumed to be from the same culture that I'm from. Well, why don't you all have the same hair? Okay, so that's biases, and we all carry them. Be mindful of how you respond to others and take responsibility for your actions. If you said something or did something that you know offended someone, or the person has told you it's offended them, find out how it impacted them, why it impacted them, and apologize. And make sure you don't do it again, right? So it's a way to start to have a respectful conversation to understand how you negatively impacted somebody else. Recognize that we all have a story. We bring our stories with us. We bring our cultures and our identities with us. So as leaders, HR administrators, employees, volunteers, community, we all need to build cultural awareness. Okay, we are always learning. Next slide, please. So Tanya, if you can just put all the, just click on each one and they'll all come up. There's 4 others. Yep, 3, 4. Perfect. So be aware of triggers in yourself. So your reaction to different names on resumes. Oh, I can't pronounce this name. Maybe the person's not going to speak English, right? We all do it. We should not do it. Do not make assumptions about other individuals or peoples. We all bring our stories into our personal interactions. And for example, there's unfair expectations of people without children. Well, you don't have children. So you can stay and work more overtime than the other person who has to leave because they have children. And same for volunteer. Don't make those assumptions, right? You don't understand people's family status. Don't make those assumptions. Continuously speaking over someone. We used to call this mansplaining, but we all do it, right? Some cultures do not speak up in meetings because they want to absorb, or they're just taught to be respectful and listen. And then you'll find that they'll come and ask you a lot of questions after, or they may ask a lot more questions in the meeting. They're not trying to be disruptive. It's just how people communicate, right? So be aware of your body language. In my culture, as a Jamaican as well, yes, I have a lot of mixes, right? The big one that we don't like is the big roll eye. When you don't like something somebody's saying, the big and rolling your eye, that's not nice, okay? Because it's demeaning. So we need to be aware of our body language as well. Base decisions on facts and information rather than gut instinct, right? Check your facts first. If you don't understand something, ask questions, ask them respectfully, but make sure that you're asking a question that's not intruding on somebody's current trauma, or that they're living through an experience that we're all seeing around the world around us, okay? Next slide, please. What changes? So I think we're getting close to the end here. So what changes, can the organization make? So by building awareness of systemic barriers, you can make change within your organization, right? By removing those inclusive barriers, and you're better positioned to appreciate people. And I can tell you, if you start looking at all these structures, what we're talking about here, how you interact with people, you will retain employees and volunteers. They will want to stay with the organization, right? And actions that you can work on are sponsorship, mentorship, process evaluation, and awareness and capacity building. So I want to stress that sponsorship and mentorship are not the same thing. So we always talk about mentorship. We start with mentorship. So mentorship is when you are helping someone, right, to achieve certain things or to learn certain things, and just talking to them about how to do better. So talking to them. Sponsorship is when you talk about someone. So they may not necessarily be in the space, but there's a volunteer role coming up and you're going to say, I know that Richard would be a good person to volunteer, right? So that's what you want to look at. And then process evaluations, look at those inclusive, your recruitment practices and make sure they're inclusive. And awareness and capacity building is critical. So making sure that you're planning for when you're bringing in new volunteers and new employees so that you give space so that they can learn about the organization before the programming starts. So try and build that capacity in. And I think next slide. And okay, so that's it. I love this tree because it shows all the leaves, how we're connected, all the different cultures, peoples, and processes. And I think that's our last slide, right? We're going on to questions. Oh, okay. If you're coming back to the next presentation, consider one thing you learned from the session and what impact, positive impact you can make in your organization, and let us know. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Ingrid. We do have a few questions. Would we like to show those questions as just to have an idea if we would like to provide an answer now, or we can also address them in the next session? How would you like to proceed?
Let's go through as many of them as we can. That'd be great.
Okay. Tanya, thank you very much for sharing the screen. Would you mind stop sharing? And I will share Slido so everyone can see the questions.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay, good questions.
We can start from the first one here, and each one, if we address it, I'll just check it out so we can see the others. There's this, I think, 4 or 5 questions so far.
Okay, so a probationary period. So traditionally under employment standards, they talk about a 3-month probation, but that's very generalized. If you are bringing someone into a volunteer or employee role that it's more complex, more community-based than they need, and it's more cyclical. So for example, certain things are not going to happen in that 3-month space. They're going to need more time, right? So some organizations will do check-in versus calling it a probation. So at 3 months, we're going to check in on these KPIs. So these metrics that we wanted you to accomplish in the first 3 months. And usually the KPIs that you want to accomplish in the first 3 months is them learning about the organization, right? Then what are they going to do in the next 3 months? They may be on a program or working through one of those cyclical programs as well. So think about the role, volunteer employee, and how much time traditionally you have seen people needing to work. The one thing is with probationary periods, you can always start them over. Problem is if you keep calling them probationary period, it demeans the person. So I'd rather say start with probationary period, but assign KPIs to it. Like, what do you want them to achieve? And then after 3 months, sit down with them. It's almost like you're doing a mini performance review. Great. So you've learned about the organization. This is where we want you to go over the next 6 months to the year. And these are your targets, right? So approach it that way through the process. How can we annihilate these biases? I wish we could annihilate these biases, but we all carry them. Yeah. Yeah. So guys, yeah, we use that word all the time. And I was in a space. So I sit on AIDS Toronto board, which is an L2S LGBTQ plus group with HIV, but there's a women's program that we also represent for high-risk women. And you can't walk into that space and say guys when you're speaking, right? It just doesn't apply. You know, we've used it over the years to kind of group people together. So yeah, so that's a good point. Why don't we say girls? Why don't we identify people? Why don't we call them by name? So you want to use crew, I'm an endurance runner, and I have a very diverse group of runners from all over the world, right? And I call them my crew, right? Because it's more inclusive. And then you don't get into trouble. So if you do get in trouble using the words, because we all use them, take the time to reflect or just apologize. Sorry, I shouldn't have used that word. Let me correct and use this word, right? I was one of those people that use guys all the time. Guys, come over here. Guys, do this. Why aren't we doing this? Come on, guys. No. Okay, take somebody to take offense to talk to you about it, and then you have to adjust. Okay, somebody's saying I've been discriminated against, but there's no way to know if it's real, or you never get a real feedback after interviews. Oh, the gaslighting interviews. Yes. Yeah. So for us in HR, we have these templates. I've seen many of them myself that say you are the best candidate, but we're not going to hire you, right? And I'd love to say that you can. I always tell people to ask for feedback to help them grow as to why they didn't get accepted in an interview. The challenge is people are using templates and they're not being intentional, right? So it's often you can tell during an interview what's happening. My challenge and what I say to people is when people reach out to you to interview you for a process, understand the organization you're going into, research the organization you're going into, ask them why your resume was chosen out of the process, because that will usually tell you if they're being intentional, right? If they're just reading your resume or they're not able to tell you why they picked you out, because to get an interview is phenomenal nowadays. That means you've been shortlisted for some reason. So take that as the first win. But I always say you are your own person and you're a human being. So you're allowed to ask why I was shortlisted. So you're going in there to ask your own questions because you want to understand the organization that's hiring you or bringing you in as a volunteer, right? So you want me to detail the difference between sponsorship and mentorship? Yeah, so again, mentorship is that you're talking to the person. You're sitting down, you're talking to the person about a work-related situation that they're trying to work through, helping them with development, talking to them about what courses they should be doing, etc. Sometimes I'll do practice sessions with my mentees to help them understand different types of interviews and prep. You know, so I tell them to come dressed like you would normally dress and let's go through a process. That's mentorship, right? Understanding how they're impacted by people around them, right? So how they communicate and helping them with that process. Sponsorship is when your mentee is not in front of you and somebody is talking about that mentee and you're correcting them and saying, you don't understand how this person thinks. This is the environment they work or volunteer best in. So you're actually promoting that employee, you're talking, or that volunteer, you're talking about that human being and as a sponsor. And some people are sponsors without you even knowing that they're sponsoring you, because they step in front of you when you're not there and talk about your capabilities and your abilities. So that makes a difference. And if you are intentionally sponsoring somebody, that's even more excellent, right? You're paving the way for them. So thank you for the questions. That was excellent.
Thank you, Ingrid. And there's one comment / question that was placed in the chat. I think it's just because of the number of words, it was not been possible to place it on Slido.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read it for everyone. So one of the participants have said, interesting for we and I as a culture, which I completely understand. However, few people I know were rejected from the job interview after volunteering for saying we have done amazing work while blah, blah, while this person was working in a not-for-profit organization and was giving answers to the questions in an interview.
So let me understand. So the person was telling them they've done amazing work, but the person wasn't really believing what they were saying. Is what I'm. So okay. The challenge. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I also wanted to say, even though we normally use Slido, I do suggest if everyone is okay, as the numbers, please feel free to unmute, and if you want to elaborate more on the comment.
Yeah. So I think Usman was the person who was speaking before. So the challenge is, don't assume that everybody's interviewing you knows how to interview, right? So they're going to make their own assumptions and have their own biases. So sometimes people feel challenged if somebody walks into this space and talks about how amazing I am and how amazing the work I've done is, versus thinking that maybe this person won't do well with community because they're too eye focused, versus understanding that the person's coming in with confidence, then maybe they're doing an amazing job, right? So what you really want to do is ask more questions, right? And unfortunately, sometimes recruiters represent the organization, but they don't really understand what is required for employees and volunteers. So bad experience, but it sometimes happens. Any other questions?
Please feel free to raise your hand and unmute if you have other questions. I know that today's session, it was very detailed, a lot to think of, and we all have experience regarding this topic on both ends, whether as recruiters and through our experience as staff and volunteers. So there's a lot to digest here. You can ask your questions in the next session, or you can also share with us your thoughts here. Just remember that we are recording the session and it will be uploaded. In the meantime, I would like to mention that the same person who mentioned that comment has provided another comment in the chat.
Oh, it's a thank you. Thank
yeah.
you, Uzma. Thank you. Etta, I love your background. I wish that was really what was happening outside. I don't even want to look outside.
Yeah, you know what, that is it, and especially in winter, we need to look into the beaches, you know, yeah.
It's true, it's true. I'm happy to answer any more questions, or if anybody has a scenario that we can talk about, that would be great. An example of a scenario where you've been interviewing somebody that you want to share, or you've been interviewed, or any recruiting practices, happy to share.
It's okay if you, as we said, there's a lot to digest here. So take your time. We will have a follow-up session also if there are no questions right now, but please feel free to share your experiences and your questions.
And you don't have to come on camera.
And you don't have to come on camera, as per our self-care steps that we discussed earlier. I do wish to ask Ingrid, right now we're almost close to the CFP, the call for IRCC. Any thought, any wishes for the agencies? Because I'm sure many of them are working right now regarding this call of proposals.
Yeah, I mean, the basic structure is what we try to provide with the tools. So don't go overboard with that. There's an understanding that you're small organizations, right? So just make sure that you use those tools and speak to the fact that volunteer experience and volunteer capacity is helping you currently. That will help you with that leverage for, this is why we need funding, right? So through the process. So, but make sure that you're talking about that structure that you're using, as we value both employees and volunteers. We could do more and serve the community more if we could turn some of those volunteers from the community into employees. So that's why that you have that basic structure, and speak to that as you work through it as well.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you for this amazing presentation today.
No
I'm
problem.
gonna share the screen to show the last slide. However, is there any last comment you'd like to say to our participants today? Oh, we have a comment.
Esther, Canadian status.
I think another bias I have seen is on Canadian status. Some people are so good, but the fact that they don't have Canadian experience becomes so difficult for even get a slot for interviews. Absolutely, yes.
So we hope that's changing this year. The Minister of Labor made an announcement that that they're looking at removing the Canadian experience status requirements in job descriptions. So we're waiting for the date. And how this started was probably the last 2 years, the government's been looking at moving the reference to visible minorities, which I do not use. And there was a group of us that were part of the consultation for that. And they ended up with a lot of the thought process that we put into it. So they're going to be calling it racialized peoples or racialized communities, which is what we felt better reflected what many of us experience in Canada today. And as part of that discussion, the other group, the task force, has got Black and LGBTQ plus to potentially be recognized in employment standards and on human rights as a separate category. So we're moving there. It's taken years to get there. We're hoping that the Canadian experience one will follow through this year. But at the end of the day, the tone has been set that you should not be discriminating against people for any status, including Canadian status. So that's been a challenge that we're hoping will be excluded. What is your stand on affirmative action in recruitment? That is a heavy topic that we will not finish today, but so affirmative action, I should state, so let me tell you the history of affirmative action. Affirmative action was started many, many years ago to allow white women access to jobs that they couldn't have because of status of we don't work, we don't get paid. So in Canadian history, when women first started working right here in Canada, their pay was given to their husband, right? So that was all part of affirmative action to get women to start earning and supporting themselves. And it was predominantly for white women. And then we moved into intersectionality. And what we found happened is that affirmative action created broader status for all sorts of different groups to be hired in, right? If you're going to use affirmative action in recruiting, it should be very specific. So for example, when you're recruiting for volunteers, etc., you should be recruiting to represent the diverse community of your purpose and who you're serving. And they should also have the skills for the roles or the ability to develop into the role, right? So you need to approach it that way versus just saying, I'm going to fill a roster with diverse people and affirmative action, right? And your interview guide, how you train people to do interviews has to be specific, that you are looking for certain skills that you must have. Like if they're bilingual, they have to be bilingual, right? And if the person needs to be representative of a community, that will help you as an organization serve that organization, that needs to happen as well. Whether that's a man, woman, non-binary, or anybody that is representative of all different communities, ages, and accessibility. So you have to be careful with the affirmative action in recruitment. It's why is the history of it and why did it come through? There's actually an article I wrote recently, and I'll send it to Adele, about women in certain industries, construction, etc., and the discrimination they're facing, that talks about that. So Adele, I'll send it to you after. You can share it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ingrid. When I send the email for the participants afterward, I will include the link to the article. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
And we have one more question. How to convince the organization to do the reimbursement or pay the fee for volunteers when they go out to present the organizations and they buy food from their pocket? Same for the staff. Why some HR members in not-for-profit never think to pay a social event ticket or dinner, but they want the volunteers and staff to go and spend from their pocket? How respectful and assertively one can ask the HR.
Okay, so one of the tools that we provided was an expense and stipend policy for volunteers and employees, and it speaks to just that. So when you're setting up your programs, and especially when you are applying for programs, you need to put your stipend policy in there, right? So it shows that you need funding to cover that as well for the employees' well-being. And sometimes it's a stipend. You know, when I was volunteering for the courts way back when, we used to have a stipend for bus tickets, right? To get the volunteers to come. So we were allowed to give up bus tickets, but we would put it in our funding request. So make sure that it's built in as part of the programs. So when you're presenting your program asks to HR and your ED, et cetera, it's built in, and you attach the policy that Adele's already sent to you, right? Because you can't expect people to represent the organization and not be able to eat. Especially, I have an event in a week. I've got volunteers for 6 hours. I have to pay to feed them, or I have to pick them up or transport them there. That's normal and respectful. We're all human. We could talk for hours. Thank you for that question, Isma.
Thank you. And thank you, Ingrid. I'm just checking, making sure if there are any other questions. Maybe I did not notice on both. Okay, there's no questions right now, but I'm sure that everyone will come back on during the follow-up with many more questions when they reflect on their own experiences, because there's the examples are endless.
Yeah,
And
they
it's
are.
really unique to each group situation.
It's unfortunate that the examples are endless, but it keeps happening.
Absolutely. I'm gonna share the screen.
Oh, there's a question,
Oh,
a hands up.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Shanette, please feel free to unmute or write in the text, whatever you prefer.
Thank you so much. My apologies. My computer, I can't even come online. I don't even see myself in the boxes. A bit of technical gremlins today on my end. But thank you so much for the presentation. As a fellow Jamaican, I love all the references you made to your Caribbean heritage. It's wonderful to hear what you have to say and the lessons learned and how you're passing on that knowledge in the spirit of not just storytelling, but of sharing knowledge that we can all learn and hopefully make wise choices as we lead those that we support as well. I don't know if my question falls in line perhaps with the conversations, but I guess it does, because it is about human resources and about, talent and all of that. I've been learning some things in the last couple of months that even within 20 years of being in the work that we're doing at Anchor Canada, sometimes I think that we're so busy doing the work that we miss out on a lot, right? You're on the ground, you're the foot soldiers, and you're not really seeing the other stuff. And so I'll just give you just quickly, in the last few months, we've been leading the African asylum seeker response here in York region in Ontario. And one of the churches that has been picking up our brothers and sisters from the streets is here in the region. And so
Been there.
you've been there, right? Right.
Mhm.
So my mom came as the same. So many of us have experienced what that is to be a refugee, an asylum seeker, newcomer. And so we were doing all these deputations for support. And what I learned, which shocked me to bits, because we have been existing as a nonprofit on program funding, one-time funding, a project, an event, but we have no operational funding. We have no capital funding. We have no staffing where we can give people vacation pay and benefits and mercs. And it's literally been, we get $50,000 for this program. We're paying somebody 35, and the rest is going towards the actual programming and all of that.
Yeah.
And as I sat doing these deputations, listening in, I saw group after group after group standing up and asking whether it's our city hall or a regional council for, let's say, 500,000 to run a school nutrition program. This morning, I was at another deputation, and a presentation was by our good friends at York University who are doing an accelerating business program. We'll ask for $1 million over a couple of years to expand the program. And I'm listening with like awe, because I never thought that as a nonprofit, government is supposed to fund you for years upon years. And I remember reading nonprofits, sometimes their year-end reports, and seeing, salaries that are deserved to their EDs and salaries to their staff. And I'm thinking to myself, is it just a Black organization thing that a lot of the Black groups that are in our circle, none of us are full-time EDs. We've all had to have second, third jobs, and we're all doing it for the love of what we do. And I'm wondering, because now I've actually just asked this morning for time to do a presentation, because my next presentation is going to be the ask for 5-year funding, which will be operational funding. And I'm just wondering if there are groups within OCASI or groups on the call who have the experience of going to government, asking for human resource support, and have been successful. And if you have been, how have you done it? Because we've never thought about asking. We've only thought about just doing the work, because even if we ask and it's refused, the work is still there, right? So I've always felt like, these children need to have an after-school tutoring program. So everybody, we're all volunteering. And yes, I know the books are going to cost money. Thank you so much for using our visa to do that. Or thank you for photocopying it on your home photocopier and buying paper at Staples. Like, we all just had to chip in because the work had to be done. And now I'm seeing that all of these years, there is another way, and it's called government. And there's an onus on them to help. And so please help me with understanding how that works and how we would go about empowering ourselves to be able to be on at least a 5-year plan to begin with, of operational funding for human resource supports. Thank you so much.
Shernette, I hear you. I see Adele nodding. So this is a bigger piece that you're asking that is hard for us to address. I mean, it's the way our structure is, corporate versus community-based, right? There's an assumption because you're community-based, we have to apply for funding every year and no long-term. So Dr. Carl James, a lot of the groups have started to talk to each other about how we can work together, but those stories are just starting. We all need to work together. Black Physicians Association, I can list them all. Black Opportunity Fund, we're all talking, but we need to work together to pull it forward stronger to get it done, right? And that's a challenge of our time, because we all have our heads down supporting communities and not looking at the bigger umbrella of where we can go. So those talks are starting. Check me on LinkedIn. You will see a lot of people starting to talk about it. Like when we show up with porta potties at the church, that was us, right? But that was just taking money out of our pockets and getting other like-minded people. So we have to do it better. And building these structures that Adele and Etta are talking about today to help you build that structure and look at how operationally you can be more efficient and ask for funding to help you on a broader basis. All of you being here together and sharing it is important, because all the voices can come together to build on that as well. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Ingrid.
Yeah, I hear you. I know you all. I've been in the church myself with food, delivering food. So tough situation.
Yes, you have been. Thank you. Thank you for your continued support as well. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Shernette, for sharing with us your experience. And I see that also in the chat, other
Madeline.
organizations are also agreeing with what you said. And thank you for saying it so perfectly. Also, for Shernette, we are receiving some case you did not notice, they're asking about your presentation. So maybe if it's possible, add your list, add the information there, or feel free to share it with the project, and we are more than happy to share it with all the participants.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
going to try to type quickly, but just for the sake of everybody. So we're doing it at the Regional Municipality of York, and it's slated for February. I believe it's the 8th, but I can confirm that. And so I'm trying to use a template of the York University presentation this morning. That was fantastic. And they asked for the $1 million+. So we'll be asking for that as operational funding, but also a big chunk of that is to support the African asylum seekers who will be, very slowly they're being embedded in our communities, getting homes, getting jobs. But what we said to the region is that even once they've achieved that, there's going to be a need for support. And if you're not empowering the Black organizations that are here, what is going to happen when they enter into jobs and they have, issues, or their children are in school and there's issues, or they need someone to help with their healthcare? Like, where do they go? And so we're asking them to support the Black organizations so that at least there'll be a group of people that we can ensure that the African asylum seekers will be successful as they are embedded into community, that they'll receive supports that they need. That's essential. We can't just kind of expect them to be on their own and then there's nothing there to kind of pick them up, or even just to socialize, even just to come together as women, as parents, as children, just different events. And how do we ensure that they're going to be successful as they enter into Canadian society? So the funding will be, about a number of things, but especially even about space. Right now, we have no office space. 20 years of working in, permitting community centers, libraries, meeting in Tim Hortons, meeting at Starbucks. Like, even just I think space is a very empowering thing. And sometimes when we deal with anti-Black racism and even equity of space, equity of being able to create how would I call it, an infrastructure for community. There's a lot of racism involved in that, because once you give people space or land, right? There's wars fought over just land. It's almost like if you keep that away from marginalized groups, then there's this feeling that they cannot come together, they cannot work together, they cannot bring forth ideas and grow and learn from each other. So even withholding space and infrastructure funding, a lot of grants come out without capital funding, and they say it in the grant guidelines: you cannot use this for capital funding. You cannot use this to lease or pay rent. So the programming is for 6 months, a year. It's over and you're back at square one without building any infrastructure. So a part of the grant will be, yes, we need funding to also have infrastructure for the community.
I'm so sorry for interrupting you.
Sorry, that's okay.
But we have 1 minute, and we won't be able to provide interpretation services after that. So we're going to conclude the session, but please do join us next session, everyone here, so we can continue this conversation.
Yep.
I know that many of what we're saying are not just questions, they're comments, but those input and examples lead to questions, which we hope that we can also address, whether during this session or during advocacy later on. I'm not sharing the screen, actually. I thought I was. I'm sharing the screen. Please note that next week, Thursday, we have our follow-up session. We will continue this conversation. I hope to see you all here.
Let's come back.
Let's come back and continue this conversation. January 18th is going to be 1 hour. We'll go with Slido, or we can also, based on our number, we can use the same approach we did here today. After you leave this session, there will be a survey. Please share with us your feedback and your thoughts. These are crucial for our future sessions. And a huge thank you for Ingrid for today's presentation, and for our interpreters and the OCASI staff for being here and supporting. And thank you, the participants, for being with us throughout this series and sharing your input and sharing with us your experience. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next week.
See you next week.